Hi and welcome to InFocus. This is Jabbar Al-Obaidi. I would like you to join me to watch part two, my discussion with Professor Brian Frederick. He's a professor of political science and the interim chair of the psychology department at the Bridgewater State University, and Dr. Jason Edwards is a professor of communication and also coordinator of the public speaking at the Department of Communication at Bridgewater State University. Both are scholars and authors of many books and articles. And the discussion in part one was about freedom of speech and First Amendment. And also this part two is actually continuation to part one, but with more information about freedom of speech and First Amendment as related to the current issues in our country, in the United States. Again, welcome. And there is a link if you would like to see part one. It appears on your screen. I appreciate everybody watching in focus, and let's start.
I mean, never mind. I mean, students and otherwise. I mean, why people resort to political violence? I mean, that's why I started the program with, what's the balance between First Amendment and Second Amendment in terms, because that's where, the clashing really, it seems to me, even linguistically happens. So what say you have?
Well, I'd first of all say that ultimately the agency is with the person who decides to cross the line between rhetoric and violence. That's why I've found the debate not to be particularly informative. No one knows exactly in all of these cases whether somebody was triggered by rhetoric. We don't know why the alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson, did what he did. He's not cooperating with police. We're trying to read tea leaves, but with all of the information not sort of exposed. Everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of commentators are suggesting that we look at this through the lens of the traditional left-right spectrum. When you're talking about individuals who take these types of violent actions, sometimes you can identify a clear and coherent political philosophy, but many times you can't. So it could just be that someone gets caught up in the world of all of these different sort of silos of where video games or online outlets that don't necessarily have really any political bent, and they might be taking this action just to get attention. Some of it is political, but as I said, even if it is, ultimately you as the individual decided to take that act of violence. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold our politicians to account or other public officials to try to be responsible in their rhetoric, especially at times where you do see the immediate aftermath. That's traditionally been when leaders would sort of put aside this normal sort of partisan or ideological gain that might be the norm in other cases, and just try to appeal to our better instincts. I think that's something many politicians could do, but we live in an era where the media landscape sort of rewards the more outlandish. We've seen people rise in the political process now who wouldn't necessarily be taken seriously because they do have these alternative platforms, and the way that they can get attention is to say very provocative, very incendiary things. And if the political incentive structure is to do that. Politicians are ambitious actors; they're going to take it, or potentially others who are in the media space trying to elevate their profile. They recognize that too. They're going to put out content that's going to get the clicks and get the interest. So ultimately, the individuals involved have to take responsibility for their actions. And there's certain other problems that we have in society that I think are much more to blame than the rhetoric of politicians. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we as citizens can't try to demand better sorts of behavior and better sorts of responses. But in many cases, we're not doing that across the board. We're doing it selectively to the people we don't like, as opposed to the ones that we agree with, and that's putting up a standard where people don't feel the same kind of the pressure to sort of conform to a more reasoned, more well thought out approach to responses in these cases. And I don't see the political environment changing anytime soon.
Jason, do you see that environment
Yeah, I
changing
think
soon?
Brian hits on something here that I think we often on the one hand, the First Amendment rights and a lot of rights in general are this notion of individual agency. These notions of exercising individuals, and what we have from from both sides of the aisle, but in particular over the last few weeks, we've been having a variety of folks on the right, including Donald Trump, trying to force institutions to strip that agency to engage in some way, shape, or form. And you've had a huge amount of pushback both from the left and the right on that kind of idea. And I think it's that tension between kind of that institutional power and trying to tamp down. Whenever we have these kinds of tragedies, we always look for some kind of institutional solution, whether that be tamping down on rhetoric, whether it be passing gun laws, whether it be, and all of those things are good debates to have. And we can certainly argue about whether or not we need more restrictive speech laws, whether we need, should we be able to say what we want in a classroom? Should we pass more restrictive gun legislation? A whole host of other things. But ultimately, it comes down to the kind of these, because we hold these kinds of ideas so individually and so personally. When you have these kinds of people who are arguing for institutional pushback, because they're held so, I think, so dearly by so many Americans, whether it's just the colloquial, it's my right to say what I want, you have that huge pushback, especially from people on the left and the right, because as Brian said, it could be weaponized against you later on. I think, in terms of being a professor, I think you'll find that a lot of those things that there is a curtailment of speech in various parts of the country. I was just reading an article yesterday that talked about at Texas Tech University, for example, when it comes to the idea of talking about gender, they're enforcing a policy that if you speak about more than, say, if you use the idea of transgender or talk about more than one gender in your classrooms, that is potentially an actionable offense to be fired and or sanctioned, because that's a law that was passed by the state. And you can argue whether or not that is a violation of one's freedom of speech, but until that time, professors in various parts of the country, or people in various parts of the country, potentially will face sanction because of the things that they say in their classrooms, or right, we see that in various kinds of places. I find that personally, as someone who's an advocate of speech in all its forms, because a lot of people, and I would argue the same, that we shouldn't have a restriction of speech. We should have more speech. I love the Louis Brandeis quotation that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and bringing that, and so I've never been an advocate of one. If we have a controversial person that comes to our campus or any campus, if they are someone of the opposite ideological spectrum, I say let them speak. I think it's okay to protest and so forth, but I am of the ultimate mind to let them speak and let them say what they want, but expose, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but get that out there to, you know, to believe that. That's just me personally, but I know that a lot of other people look at a college campus or other places as a space that's safe and so forth. But
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because that brings me to almost the the last question. So how can we, do you have any, do you recommend any strategy to de-escalate, the situation where, as you both mentioned, that people, they have, the ability to engage other opinions, to talk, to tolerate, to understand, or you just leave it, and let the things happening just like by nature? But any
Brian,
strategy you think that you can share with us?
go ahead, Brian, if you want to take this one. I'll go
Sure.
first.
Yeah, I think it's I think the solutions are in short supply. I think you have to start with yourself first. So Jason was mentioning his belief in sort of more speech, and that's something that I've sort of tried to maintain. So I know I've had instances in the past few years where often I was on the opposing side of many of my more liberal colleagues who did favor restrictions on various speech-related questions, and was sometimes allied with more conservative faculty members who I wouldn't agree with on some other issues. But what I found is that didn't carry over very consistently. Now I'm sort of at on the other side of those questions from some of more of my conservative colleagues who have sort of, not all of them, but some have come into line with the Trump administration and have supported some of the proposals and some of the actions which I feel are antithetical to that. So what I try to do is maintain an ideological consistency regardless of who's in power. Take the pro free speech position, not just related to government, which I think is sort of absolutely essential, but in other aspects of life, try to encourage uh, more open dialogue. And that doesn't mean that somebody who disagree with gets to say whatever they want without being challenged. They can have their voice, but they have to be able to hold up in the marketplace of ideas, and if their views are unpopular, suffer sort of the criticisms. But that's all. Also, I think you have to sort of conduct yourself with the kind of expectations that you'd want to see with others. So I think it's important that, when we're going to post on social media, asking ourselves, is this really what you want to say? Is this really a reflection of how you truly feel? Or are you getting caught up in the moment? Try to be more reflective. Don't use the shorthand of social media. We as scholars have the luxury of being able to write in more long form. And so I think that's something that we can do, but also in our classrooms, allowing students of all different ideological, political, demographic perspectives to feel like they have a a venue where they can speak openly and be able to have their voice heard. I think ultimately, we have to set the example, based on what we can do, based on the positions that we have as professors and academics, and try to do so in a way that we all have our own political predispositions and things that we want to see happen in society, but try to, as to the best of our ability, to be consistent in our principles, regardless of who's in power, be it at the national level, state level, local level, or even within our university environments, so that it doesn't seem like we're being politically opportunistic to silence people because we don't like what they have to say, and then we think that will advance our political agenda. So I think that's kind of the best approach that we as individuals can take. As far as societal changes, I'm not so optimistic there's much that we can do in terms of trying to shift the tide away from the direction of how things are going right now.
Jason, your closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, aside from people taking my argumentation class next semester, haha. No, I think that Brian's, it's so much, it's extremely difficult to provide some kind of recourse at a societal level when, a lot of this, as Brian was saying, it kind of starts at home. I certainly try to model at least public facing argumentation on my own social media accounts. I certainly and fully admit that sometimes I don't live up to that standard, especially if I'm in an emotional debate, especially when I was in an emotional debate with family members, and stuff like that about my personal kinds of things. So try to model that kind of idea. I don't think there is an I don't think there's a societal way of, kind of doing that. I wish there was. I think that, and I would also kind of push back on the idea that, the notion that we often reach for this golden age of civil debate in America where things were always hunky dory. And, if we could just go back to that golden age, everything would be fine. It doesn't exist. It's kind of like when I talk to my students about this, we talk about the idea of media bias and so forth. And my students were like, well, I'm kind of like, well, guess what? The media has been biased since the beginning in our history. I mean, the early American newspapers were mouthpieces for political parties. They weren't all like, well, give me the facts, ma'am, and nothing but the facts. That has not existed. It's certainly a construct over the last few years, and we try to, idealize that, but we idealize a previous time. But again, if you take a look at, I think I always like to think of American politics as a pendulum. We are in one aspect of that pendulum, and I really do think that eventually, whether or not it comes when Donald Trump leaves office, or maybe it never comes, or not in my lifetime, but it will swing back to where you're looking for people to have a more civil dialogue with however you couch that idea. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there are always going to be restrictions on speech. I mean, speech is not an absolute thing. I mean, we have all kinds of laws about creating free speech zones at different kind of protests. If you are a member of a certain organization, like there have been cases where if you're a member of a far right or organization like the Ku Klux Klan, you can have a parade, right? You can actually, but you have to apply for a permit. You can't just gather with a group of people and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to walk down the street. I mean, there are restrictions embedded in there no matter what. I think ultimately, what's kind of more importantly is kind of like how we engage on an interpersonal level with people. And that's what I fear more than anything. It's this lack of engagement and so forth. I mean, Brian's love of the Los Angeles Lakers, I just can't abide. I'm sorry. I mean, they left Minnesota, and I just can't. I'm sorry, Brian. I can't love you for it, man. I just really can't. I'm a T-Wolves fan. I know. And this might cause some incivility between us, all right? But we already know this,
With that,
or
with
his
this,
love of Clemson. I mean, come on, you know.
that's, that's very
But
nice,
yeah.
closing
So
thought. Thank you so much. Guys, you really, Dr. Jason Edwards, Professor of Communication, Bridgewater State University, Professor Brian Frederick is Professor of Political Science and interim chair of the psychology department. Thank you so much, Bridgewater State University. That is, thank you so much. Really, you reconstruct everything, and I hope people will find this is a very educational, very informative. Certainly, I learned a lot from it, although I'm into it. But thank you for your time. I appreciate you, and thank you for watching InFocus. This is Jabbar Al-Obaidi, and we'll be talking to you next week. Thank you so much.